In the seconds, minutes, and hours after the explosion at the fourth unit of the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, electrical cables were damaged, torn open. Water from the reactor poured into the narrow corridors that housed the wiring, short-circuiting them. The power to the damaged portions of the building had been cut on the morning of April 26th, but this could not be permanent. The first expeditions to try and navigate under the reactor would only be possible if the electricity was turned on again. There was no way to monitor all of the cables in the collapsed areas, but they had to hope it was safe enough. A few days later, their hope was proven misplaced. The time was 1:40 a.m., May 23rd. The head of the reactor shop, Sergei Petrovich Lebedev, was conducting a dosimetric survey of the collapsed building. But when he got to the south pump hole, he saw his worst fears. Thick smoke filling the large room. Chernobyl Unit 4 was on fire again. He quickly sounded the alarm at the fire station. Firefighters were again going to have to face the blaze. Despite this being the south pump hole inside the building, this room was not safe like you would assume. The radiation in the room stood around 50 roentgens per hour on average, but spiked up to 200 in some places. The blaze seemed to be coming from a reserve battery. However, nobody could access it due to all of the rubble already in the room. It would take half an hour for the main body of firefighters to be alerted, as they were now based in the town of Chernobyl, at the very south end of the cooling pond. That night, in tents, people were still awake. It had been an unusual day already, and the tension was not dissipating. However, people were still smoking and telling stories of their time in the exclusion zone, and then they all went to sleep. But when they found out, they sent in everyone. There was no real alert, just people getting ready, alerting their comrades they were being sent back into the nuclear power plant. 9 separate fire departments with a combined 138 firefighters. 64 men from the Kharkiv Battalion's military unit 6184, 24 men from the Chernihiv Battalion's military unit 6183, and 21 men from the Air Force of the Zhytomyr Regional Executive Committee. It took them 15 minutes to make the drive north, and the first firefighters to arrive were captained by Chikarev, who had been brought from the Leningrad nuclear power plant due to his experience with RBMKs. But the man in charge of it all was Vladimir Maximchuk, and he decided to organize the fight against the blaze to limit everyone's radiation dose. Groups of 5 men would run into the south pump hole, complete their task, and then run back, to be replaced by the next group. The only person who actually stayed in close contact with the radiation was Maximchuk himself. The first group of firefighters went in, but didn't actually fight the fire. They cut open a cable box leading towards the blaze, and began threading a hosepipe into the cable shaft. After 18 minutes, they hit their dosimetric limit and had to return. Then the next group went in. Shortly thereafter, the Kyiv branch of the fire brigade, based in the town of Chernobyl for the time being, also joined the fray. And still working in these shifts of 5 men against the radiation, they began to network a series of hoses through the building, all the way out to a fire engine, connect the engine to a hydrant, and begin pumping water into the cable passage, suffocating the fire. A few hours behind the convoy of the Kyiv Fire Brigade, at 6:46 a.m., were the convoy of fire engines from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, having driven all the way from Kyiv. And behind them was Nikolai Steinberg, recently promoted to Deputy Chief Engineer of the power plant. He'd been sleeping at Skaznochy camp, and shook awake by someone, telling him everyone was waiting for him at the headquarters. So, they journeyed to the power plant, not getting in a protective vehicle as there was simply no time. When he arrived, a long line of fire engines lined the canals to take water into the power plant at a moment's notice. There was a direct order for the new arrivals: get in there and extinguish the blaze. The groups rushed in, not measuring the radiation dose as they went. Equipped with only their hoses and barrels, it only took them 4 minutes to locate the source of the fire, by poking their head into the cable tunnel and seeing the glowing wires for the first time. 4 more minutes, and the cable tunnel fire was extinguished. The firefighters then turned their attention to room 401, running between the south and north pump hole. Another cable fire had broken out here, and they quickly extinguished that as well. Just as they were about to leave, they heard a shout from one of the hatches. A soldier had been stood on it when it broke against his weight, and he fell almost 2.5 meters, breaking his leg. It took 3 people to pull him back out and carry him back through the pump hole to safety. Back at the campsite, just 3 people remained to coordinate things from there, gathering intel. Communication remained vague. "I see fire in the premises of Unit 3, one of the firemen on site declared. North of the pump hole is room 403, where the cables had also ignited. They attached more hose pipes together, and it just barely reached in, but it was not enough. So they came up with a new plan. If water could not be safely used to permanently suffocate the flames, why not use foam? Before they could do this, they first had to deal with another problem. Water shafts, designed to take water away from these cables, had not been sealed, and they drained into the transport corridor underneath, a network of rail lines that ran through the building to transport equipment and the nuclear fuel. Now, that corridor was 40 centimeters deep with water. Water was still gushing down, but they were able to plug the holes. And finally, they could fill all the cable rooms with foam. The fires, for now, were truly extinguished. As soon as Steinberg arrived, he received a report from Maximchuk, telling him that everything seemed to be under control. However, they were going to send more firefighters in, and it seemed all of Skaznochy was about to be mobilized. So, Steinberg called his superior, Taras Plug, who had made it all the way to the Unit 4 control room. The situation was under control now, it seemed. Steinberg called off the mobilization, and they waited for dawn to see if there was any developments. When the sun broke, helicopters flew over the crippled reactor, looking for any smoke. There was none. The moment that report was finalized, all hell broke loose in the bunker. Deputy ministers, senior members of the government commission, all of whom slept through the fire, stormed into the bunker to find out what had happened. Steinberg was on the ropes and had to explain everything to people upset that they weren't put in charge. But one question hovered in the air. Where was Nikolai Fomin? He was here, but I don't touch him, Plokey would later explain. He's insane. I can't imagine what he was like on the 26th. Around 9 a.m, Maximchuk was evacuated to the hospital, having spent hours around the pump hole. Designers began to pore over the designs of the building, trying to identify where to cut the cables. And then, at 1 p.m, the supervisor of the reactor shop on shift approached Steinberg again. Nikolai, it's burning again there. Nobody knows except me. Steinberg and the supervisor snuck out of the bunker and made their way to Unit 4. A group of firefighters had been stationed in the control room, and they grabbed them as well, bringing them to the pump hole. The supervisor pointed up to the wall of the south pump hole. The cable here was burning now, glowing bright. The firefighters aimed the hoses at the cables, but the pressure was far too low to reach the cables. Steinberg thought for a few minutes, and then had an idea. "Leave it be," he said. "If they cut the power to Unit 4, then there would be no more risk of these blazes, and there would be no firefighters risking their lives." They did as Steinberg suggested. Every few hours, someone would check on the blaze, and by the evening it had burned itself out. The fire was now extinguished. The blame game in the bunker, that had always taken place after any minor setback over the previous month, did not take place. The high voltage passing through the wires was too dangerous, and had cost the safety of firefighters. So, that day, they began to de-energize the building, and on May 26th, Unit 4 was finally separated electrically from the rest of the building. All quiet in Unit 4. All that remains is equipment that will never be used, smouldering nuclear fuel, and the buried body of Valery Hodomchuk. The story of the fire was relegated into the black hole of covered-up events that unfolded during the cleanup of Chernobyl. There was little reason to digress it. All in all, it was caused by a mistake of the Commission, poorly thought, and ended by doing literally nothing. Firefighters had been needlessly exposed to harmful amounts of radiation, and one unlucky soldier had broken his leg. Plus, they already had heroes. The firefighters of the night of the disaster, and the immediate precursor events to the fire, the divers. The events only became even remotely public when the survivors of the night spoke up, and Steinberg gave his own details in a book he later published. The accident did have some benefits, however. The fire extinguishing mechanisms of the first 3 units were greatly expanded following the accident, and became a priority for restarting the undamaged reactors at Chernobyl. And it led to renewed vigour in dealing with a new concern, the lack of rainfall. Even a month after the accident, the Red Forest had already earned its name. The risk of a fire was too great to ignore. Round-the-clock preparation for such a scenario was created, helicopters constantly flying over the site. And one government commission member, Yuri Mazlikov, created advanced firefighting techniques for wildfires that were tested in the summer of 1986. And the year after, he was awarded the Order of Lenin. One individual would not leave the fire with his life intact. Maximchuk. In the hours fighting the fire around the front line, he accumulated a radiation dose reportedly as high as 700 roentgens. Enough to kill most people. But he endured, in and out of hospital, giving interviews when he was well enough, but his fate was inevitable. He passed away on May 22nd, 1994, exactly 1 day before the 8-year anniversary of the fire that broke out. He is buried in the Matinsko Cemetery, just a few meters from the graves of 27 of the 31 official victims of the disaster. Posthumously, he was awarded Hero of Russia, the first firefighter to receive the award.